You all have joined us on the Surplus Trust Policy Dialogue. Today we're looking at the just ended Botswana elections to analyze the factors behind it. And to help us in this exercise, I have my fellow citizens from Botswana. Botswana is my other home. I have, first of all, to welcome Unity Dow, an old friend. Those of you who know Southern Africa and Botswana in particular will know all about Unity Dow. She made a history, good history. So Unity, welcome to the dialogue forum. We are happy you were able to join us. And also my former student and fellow trustee on the Surplus Trust Board of Trustees, Onolina. Welcome, my girl. Nice to see you, as always. And Professor David Silgudu, also from the old days, but of course much younger than us. These are the guys whom we've reproduced in a better form than we were ourselves. So the topic is very clear. The background is also very clear and perhaps even self-explanatory. We've had elections. You can go back to the Zambia elections, which brought in HH, and then on to Zimbabwe elections, notorious elections from 2018, but much earlier, from 2000 in fact. Every election in Zimbabwe has been disputed since 2000. And what has happened on the backdrop of the Zambian elections, even then, and which brought HH, but more so in the context of the Botswana elections, the Mozambique elections, the Mauritius elections, all happening so quickly. We have as political scientists in particular, but also as observers of elections generally, come to the conclusion that, or confirm the theory, that it is seldom that a ruling party is returned after elections. And this is globally, for the simple reason, but in particular in post-colonial Africa, mainly because the government of the day, the ruling party of the day, is confronted with so many issues about which the citizens are seldom satisfied in the course of the 5 years that they are in office. So it is not surprising that the ruling parties have been abandoned by the electorate. What is surprising in that context and against that background is when a ruling party wins, in inverted commas. And so we are able to conclude, on the basis of precedent this year alone, on the last year, that it is more likely that ZANU-PF lost in Zimbabwe. And for those of us who are observers of the Zimbabwe situation, we can say with confidence that Emerson Mnangagwa lost the election last year and the election before. And we have to also begin to surmise about Mozambique and perhaps conclude, yes, Frelimo is likely to have lost in the election a few weeks ago. In the same way that the ANC's fortunes were badly dented in the election this year. So, are we speaking of an obvious situation in what we have seen in Botswana? If so, we'd like to hear from our panelists. Why so? And secondly, what are the factors? How shall we describe the failure, if so, of the ruling party, BDP, that after 58 years in power, it has been dumped by the electorate? What are the factors? And what other conclusions are we to make about Botswana in particular as we go forward, and the region in general? So, I invite my first panelist, main presenter, David Sibubudu to lead us into this discussion. David?
Thank you very much, Ibo. Am I audible?
You're audible enough, yes?
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking you for inviting us to this talk, at which we are looking at the most recent elections that we have just held in our country, Botswana. And we are grateful for the invite, and we hope we'll be able to engage in a discussion that will be able to benefit those who are in attendance. And also to thank my two compatriots in respect of Dr. Onalen Nasololwan, a former colleague at the University of Botswana, who has done a sterling job in the area and made a critical contribution in the area of democracy. And we are grateful, and we still recognize her even today in terms of the work that she has done in our country. And of course, we also wish to thank our Honorable MP, Dr. Unity Dow, who has just been re-elected as an MP. We congratulate her for that, for the good work that they have put in, and ultimately she was able to win. And as you have just rightly pointed out, Ibo, Dr. Dow has done very well for our country. She has got a good history. She has made a major contribution in our country, and even in the region. She has been a judge. She has been a minister. She has been an MP now. So she has made a sterling contribution in our country and in the region and beyond. So we are quite grateful for the work that she has done. But without any waste of time, let me go straight into the topic. The discussion today looks at Botswana's elections 2024 as a post-mortem. These are very interesting times indeed, Ibo, because a few years back, what we are going to talk about today, probably it was not something that we could even consider to take place. And that makes it quite interesting in the sense that, Botswana, if you look at the literature, it has always been considered as a leading country in the area of democracy, a leading country in the area of development. When we consider where Botswana started in 1966. Including even by the World Bank and other analysts who were always as a result, it was able to realize some positive economic and social indicators that were well recognized internationally. So that is Botswana that we're talking about. So it has always been regarded as a positive story in Africa that is there to offer lessons to other countries in Africa. Because as we all know that most African countries, including our dear neighbor Zimbabwe, although the country started very well in 1980, we all know what happened recently, all in part because of
David? 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 David Mpofu, can you assist here?
I think we've lost him. It must be the network.
Oh, God. David?
Okay, he's off the platform now.
Oh God, man. Where is he? What's wrong? What happened, David?
Hello, am I audible?
You went off. You went off the platform.
Yes, I don't know what happened.
Where
Am I
are
back?
you in the bush? You better start again. You better start again, really.
Oh,
With
okay.
the main presentation.
Am I audible?
Like, you are very audible.
Okay, thank you. I don't know what went wrong. Anyway, in terms of where we are coming from as a country, Botswana has always been regarded as a good example, simply because of what it has been able to realize and achieve, especially in the first 30 years or so of its independence. So Botswana has always been a positive story to its peers or to other African countries, and probably even beyond. So in that case, the assessments that have always been coming out of Botswana were always positive. But what is quite clear is that Botswana has been ruled by the same party since independence. Since it won the first elections, the pre-independence elections in 1965, Botswana has been run by the same party. Of course, we have seen a change of leadership, but it has always been run by the same party, being the Botswana Democratic Party. So on that basis, the party was able to entrench itself because of a number of factors. So I know in the literature, which I believe probably some of you have been able to lay your hands on, a number of factors have been advanced that have aided, that have facilitated the dominance of the BDP or to sustain the BDP over the years in government. One of those, I think we should look at the history behind the formation of the party. The BDP was formed as a grand coalition, a coalition that more or less accommodated almost everyone, to the extent, including even the chiefs. So on that basis, and what it was able to achieve thereafter, by ensuring that the resources of the country were being used at least in the first 30 years or so, they were used for the benefit of the majority. And as a result, we were able to see the lives of the majority of people being transformed. The poverty levels declining, unemployment rates declining over the years, simply because of the positive management that the party engaged in. And I think probably because my compatriot, Dr. Dow, could attest to that, at least in the first 20 to 30 years or so, including probably even Dr. Sololwane. And I mentioned Dr. Dow because she was in government at the time, because she appreciated much better how the party has been able to function and be able to deliver. And on that basis, the party was able to endear itself to the electorate to the extent that it became so popular, especially in the rural areas, simply because of what it has been able to achieve. The other thing that has really aided the party over the years, I think, is something that has been widely discussed in the literature, is the dominance which was aided by the excessive powers that were enjoyed by the executive, which as a result was able to dominate other branches of government, such as the parliament and even the judiciary. So on that basis, the dominance of the executive to some extent aided the party to be able to sustain itself to be in power over an extended period, which we all know that it is 58 years now until it was dislodged by the opposition coalition on 30th of October 2024. So that is one of the key factors that over the years has been considered as to have aided the sustenance of the BDP in power. The other factor is the issue of a dependent and weak civil society. That meant that because in the case of Botswana, we have a system whereby the state dominates almost every sector, because our private sector is so small, to the extent that even the civil society is to some extent, or the civic space is dominated by the state, in the sense that we had a dependent and a weak civil society. The other factor which I think we need to mention is the issue of a controlled and restricted media, to the extent that we had a private media that was, because of the absence of, because of a smaller private sector, we had a private media that was dependent on the state for its survival. So, and that, on that basis, this ensured that there was an element of self-censorship on the part of the private sector. At least that is what we saw. But at the same time, we find that because, like it is the case in a number of other African countries, even in Zimbabwe, for instance, we found that in the case of Botswana, the state media was tightly controlled to the extent that the other voices, especially critical voices, were left out, to the extent that there was only more or less one source of information, simply because the private media could not reach all the other areas. So the state media dominated the waves to the extent that the ruling party was, that is the BDP, then took advantage of that, and it was able to benefit, because in terms of the broad guiding policy of the state media, it was well articulated as far back as 1992 that the state media only broadcast what unites the nation, and it is difficult to appreciate what it is all about. But in any case, that was the broad guiding policy of the state media. So on that basis, these are some of these factors that over the years, they have been able to assist the BDP to remain to be on power, or rather in power. But at the same time, we found that the opposition, as far back as 1965, with the formation of the Botswana National Front, it has, because the BNF was formed as a front that was meant to bring together warring factions. So on that basis, we can say that pre-electoral coalitions, they go back as far back as 1965, or just be around the independence time when the BNF was being formed. So that, on that basis, we can say that, so these pre-electoral coalitions, they are not a new thing, but they've been going on or been tried or attempted without much success. So fast forward, I think the opposition parties, which involved the BNF amongst others and the Botswana People's Party, tried in 1991 to try to form one of the major, what can be, in terms of our history, what can be considered to be a major pre-electoral coalition. But even then, it did not succeed. But thereafter, other pre-electoral coalitions were tried, but even then, they did not succeed. But around 2011, we had a measure that is one of the longest strikes in the country by the public sector unions or public sector employees. And since following that strike, there was talk of the formation of an umbrella coalition. And as a result of that, following that strike, 4 political parties tried to form what came to be as known as Umbrella One. And these were the Botswana Congress Party, the Botswana National Front, the Botswana People's Party, and the Botswana Movement for Democracy, which was a breakaway from the ruling Botswana Democratic Party. But even then, that pre-electoral coalition did not succeed, in the sense that one of the major opposition parties in our history, that is the Botswana Congress Party, decided to pull out when that coalition collapsed in December 2011, simply because there was disagreement in terms of the model of cooperation, as well as, amongst others, on allocation of constituencies. But we saw the other three political parties sustaining that cooperation, to the extent that in 2012 they decided to form what came to be known as Umbrella 2. That's how the Umbrella for Democratic Change was formed in 2012. It was formed by three political parties ultimately. That is the BNF, the Botswana People's Party, and the Botswana Movement for Democracy. To the extent that when we went for the 2014 elections, the Umbrella participated and the results were promising. But again, because one of the key parties, the BCP, was not a part of that coalition, it was not able to dislodge the BDP. But we saw again in the next election, which came in 2019, we saw the BCP going back into the Umbrella, becoming part of the Umbrella. And we had more or less a united pre-electoral coalition that tried to dislodge the BDP. But even then, it did not succeed to dislodge the BDP. And following the 2019 elections, a few years later, we saw the BCP once again withdrawing or pulling out or opting out of the Umbrella, citing issues of governance, issues of governance which were top on the agenda in terms of the BDP policies. They decided to pull out or opt out of the Umbrella. But this time around, we came to realize that, especially in the last 5 years, the challenges of unemployment intensified, the challenges of poverty intensified, the challenges of corruption intensified. We saw a collapse in trust in government to the extent that even the Directorate of Intelligence and Security Services, that the DIS, was in the forefront now, being involved or performing even the functions of other agencies such as the anti-corruption agency, the police, and others. So I think on that basis, because of the intensification, because the corruption intensified, unemployment intensified, poverty intensified, trust in government intensified, to the extent that President Masisi's government was defined by corruption and dishonesty. I think a combination of all these factors were able to lead ultimately to the loss of the BDP on 30th of October 2024. So it's not just the one factor, because we can cite the issue of corruption, issues of unemployment, issues of poverty, lack of trust in government institutions, which almost really collapsed. Trust collapsed almost in government, such that people lost trust in government because public officials, they trade on the basis of credibility. So a combination of this. So the opposition, to some extent, they found a fertile ground whereby poverty was a big problem, unemployment was a big problem, having increased much, much higher than it was 5 years ago. So when they presented their manifestos to the electorate, they became more appealing to the electorate in the sense that they were promising better lives, better transformation of the lives of Botswana, who were really faced by the challenge of unemployment, especially the youth. because Botswana has got a young population. So a substantial percentage of our population was unemployed. So when the opposition presented this, their manifesto, and in light of the background of the issue of corruption, the challenge of poverty, the challenge of unemployment, the challenges of lack of trust in government, all this when put together, and the promises that were put forward by the opposition, I think the opposition manifesto became more attractive. And today we can talk about the BDP as an opposition, such that because of that combination of all those factors, we saw the umbrella for democratic change dislodging the BDP on 30th of October 2024, with the umbrella winning 36 seats in parliament, and rather in the National Assembly, the BCP winning 15 seats, becoming the main opposition. That is the party that Unity Dao is a part of. It has become the main opposition. And then the Botswana Patriotic Front winning 5 seats. That is, the Botswana Patriotic Front is a party in which the former president Ian Khama is a patron, and the BDP only managing to win 4 seats, and the remaining seat was won by an independent who was expelled from the BDP by President Masisi. So as a result, that is how the BDP, to some extent, I would say, lost power. So we can say that despite the BDP, probably, I must accept and acknowledge that the BDP historically has done very well. But over the years, I think it became complacent to the extent that they even came up with a slogan declaring that there is still no alternative. So despite the BCP not being part of the umbrella, we saw the BDP being dislodged from government. So if one were to ask, what is it that probably contributed to the loss or to the defeat of the BDP after so many years in power? And despite the propaganda that they used, despite access to the state media and all the resources, and I must say that the amount of resources that the BDP put in the past elections were quite enormous. A lot of resources were put in there, a lot of money was put in there, but still they were defeated simply because there were challenges of poverty, challenges of unemployment. Especially unemployment was a major challenge that the country faced. So as a result of that, I think when you look at it, is one of the major factors that I think today led to the loss of the BDP, and of course the challenge of corruption. Because if you look at the indices today, you will come to realize that corruption has become so widespread to the extent that even the first family and some of his relatives were implicated in corrupt activities. So I think all this, when put together, they really contributed to the loss of the BDP. But I think we must also appreciate that there was an element of demonstration effect from other countries like Zambia and South Africa, whereby the ANC lost the majority. So as a result, you could see that the demonstration effect, to some extent, it did work. But of course, I think the issues that I've raised of unemployment, issue of poverty, challenges of corruption, lack of trust, to the extent that people had lost trust in government, I think that really contributed to the loss of the BDP, such that today we are talking about the BDP as an opposition party. And I think we must also appreciate that at the end of the day, its leader, when he realized that he has lost or he was losing, he did concede much earlier. And this is something that I think really is rather unusual in Africa, to the extent that although even the opposition prior to the elections were concerned about a possibility of elections being rigged. Ultimately, they were declared that the elections went very well. They were free and fair. And even the new leader of the country, Duma Boko, did appreciate that, did declare that this was democracy in motion. Because now we can talk about Botswana offering lessons. But prior to the elections, they were talking about the possibility of elections being rigged. But once they won elections, we had even their leader declaring that no, the elections went very well. But I must also state that prior to the elections, there were a number of court cases whereby the opposition tried to challenge certain decisions being made by the electoral authority, but without much success because they lost those decisions. Because in our case, we also had reached a point whereby even the judiciary, our judges, some of them were executive minded to the extent that even cases where someone probably even in late terms, you will think they were winnable by the opposition. They went in the favor of the electoral authority. So despite all these challenges, I think ultimately the opposition was able to dislodge the ruling party. I think probably I should stop there and probably allow for others to intervene. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. I'm sorry that we had problems with your connectivity. There were times you were completely off platform, but I hope the audience and the other panelists were able to follow you. I did, also because I'd had a discussion with you soon after the election. I have a number of questions as a follow-up, David. I think it's now legion that Botswana has been very, can I say, a model in terms of how elections are held and how transitions take place. There's no doubt about that. We're all very proud, and it renewed the faith in elections on the part of many citizens, especially when we have had such nasty electoral processes next door in Zimbabwe. Not to mention the interference on the part of ZANU-PF in electoral process in Botswana. So, according to you, the main reasons for the BDP losing was unemployment and poverty, corruption, dishonesty, and perhaps we can comment to what extent, two other factors, if I may ask. To what extent did the ZANU-PF interference play a factor? And secondly, to what extent did the Ian Khama factor constitute a contribution to the demise of the BDP? Can you comment on those two?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start with the first one. I'm sure we are all aware that at some point our electoral management body did visit Zimbabwe with the intention to, according to the side of the story, according to the explanation, to be able to understand the machines and appreciate the machines that were being used to accredit election observers. However, we did receive a report, at least through the media, from the Zimbabwean Electoral Authority, which did indicate that the Botswana Electoral Authority visited Zimbabwe to come and benchmark in terms of how elections are run. And following that visit, I think that attracted a lot of criticism for the government as well as for the election management body. I think for obvious reasons, because Zimbabwe was not considered to be a good example that any country that wants to be taken seriously could use as a place where it could go and benchmark in terms of how elections or proper elections are run. So I think that factor also did intensify or did attract a lot of criticism for the IEC in Botswana, and of course government, because that ultimately made a lot of people become quite suspicious or become wary of how what kind of government that are we having, whereby a government that is considered to have stolen elections, they can go and be able to benchmark them. So I think that is one factor that, to some extent, it did attract a lot of noise. It did attract a lot of criticism for our electoral authority and the government. But we all know that the relations that Botswana had with Zimbabwe, especially between the two during the time of President Masisi. So of course we must appreciate that our relations were quite strong, were quite positive. But at the same time, I think what we saw with especially with the last elections in Zimbabwe, it was not a good example that we could have used. As for Ian Khama, it's a very interesting one. Of course, we must accept that the return of Ian Khama from South Africa and Eswatini was something that most of us did not anticipate, because we had thought that probably he was not going to be allowed, but we all know that he came back. And once he came back, he was able to campaign freely. And we saw his party at least winning, increasing the number of seats, because in the 2019 elections, his party won 3 seats. But this time around, it increased the seats to 5. So to that extent, I think although his party did not win a good number of seats, to some extent, I would say it did contribute, because by contesting and for him being available on the ground, helping his party to be able to reach out and to campaign freely, he was able to make a dent, however small it could have been, but I think he did to some extent. But I think we must also admit that this time around, probably even in his absence, I think it is probable that the opposition could still have gone ahead and won elections, considering the challenge of poverty, because poverty had really increased especially in the last 5 years. If you look at the statistics, you realize that some put it as high as around 28%. And then the same goes for unemployment. Some put it at around, like the Bertelsmann German report, they put it at around 57%. Some reports put unemployment at 38%. So you can see that in the last 5 years, the unemployment rate had gone up from the way it was at around 23%. So that was a major challenge. So I tend to think that I was trying to argue that even if Ian Khama did not return, the challenges that we faced of unemployment, poverty, and now being compounded by the issue of corruption, which became a serious factor to the extent that the issue of corruption was playing out to the extent that even some of the relatives of the first family even went to court over a tender which was alleged to have been corruptly obtained. So, and the interesting part is that the president did not see anything wrong with that, to the extent that he would even go publicly and say that no, his relatives were not engaged in corruption. Yet some of them were given direct appointments in terms of tenders, something which is quite strange. Really, that was something which was quite interesting about the former president, President Masisi, and he was competing for government resources with everybody else, and we do not understand how can someone who is a leader and he's not see anything wrong with that. So really, I think the issue of corruption, in a way, is one other factor that really attracted a lot of criticism for government, and probably contributing to the loss of the seat of power.
So essentially unemployment and poverty is central to what happened in the election, and corruption. But I dare say these are the two factors over the years that have impacted on the elections. Even during Kama's era, there were also reports of corruption on the part of the Kama regime. There are also reports, not to mention the issue of unemployment and poverty, which has been increasing. So what's new? And what are we to expect in the next 5 years? What indications are there that the same fate that befell BDP won't befall the UDC 5 years down the line? What will be the difference?
Of course, I must agree that even during the presidency of Ian Khama, poverty was a challenge, unemployment was a challenge, but not to the same extent. Because if you look at the previous figures, you will realize that unemployment and poverty were declining. But in the last 5 years, we have seen unemployment and poverty increasing. So really, that meant that a lot of people were not having access to gainful employment, which was a major challenge, despite the promise to create a lot of jobs by Masisi's government. That is not, we did not see those jobs being created. So in a way, I think one of the things that created to the loss is the failure to create jobs despite the promise to create them. And I think my colleagues from Botswana would agree with me that one of the things that the government had pledged in 2019, for instance, was to create a lot of jobs through what they called the manufacturing of electric, what do they call them? What is the nomenclature they use? Electric cars and electric cars. But what we only saw just a few days before elections, we saw a car that was manufactured elsewhere being disassembled in Botswana, and then we were given an impression that it was manufactured in Botswana. When it was imported from outside and dismantled or disassembled in Botswana, then they reassembled again, then they claim that to have. So you can see the level of dishonesty, which led to lack of trust in government. It was quite serious under the President Masisi, to the extent that the president would say something today, 2 days later or a few days later, and then he will claim not to have said it. And I think that really showed that the president and his government at the time, they were not taking the citizens quite serious. One thing that we must also appreciate, Ibo, is that, you know, the nature of the voter that we are having today is different. The majority of the voters today are young. So they are educated, they understand the issues, and therefore, I think they cannot just simply be cheated overnight by someone promising something that they cannot deliver. As to whether the new government will be able to deliver, is we are yet to see. But it won't. I must say, it won't be easy. It won't be easy in the sense that they take over a government at the time when the state coffers are almost dry, at a time when the diamonds are not moving, when the diamond market is depressed. So it will take them some time to be able to reverse some of the damages that the previous.
Okay, David, we've lost you again. Let me leave it at that, David. I'll come back to you. Thank you for the outline. Let me now move to Unity Dow. Please make your presentation, and then we have a chat like I have had with David. Welcome, Unity. And again, I forgot that you were elected as a member of parliament. Congratulations, Unity.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ibu. And thank you very much, David and Onalena. I cannot hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you, Unity. I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu. And thank you very much, David and Onalena. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. Let me just start by saying I agree with David, on his analysis as to why the BDP lost after 58 years in power. Corruption, unemployment, declining education standards, declining health standards. I think we can all agree with that. But I think you asked the question also as to, those are usually the reasons why countries or governments collapse, and why now? I think, first of all, I believe that the same reasons that we've used before when we said, why do Botswana have such boring elections, as one president once said, meaning, no violence, people go in fighting and they cast their votes, and the votes are tallied and everybody accepts the results. I think it's anchored in the culture, of Botswana, of believing that the greatest war, the greatest fight has to through your voice. There's a saying that says, meaning the greatest war has to be the war of words, or the idea that the freedom of speech, is anchored in our culture, that those are, I think, people truly believe that. And I think what has happened in the last maybe 10 years, certainly in the last 5 years, is that people spoke before in the Kotla system, but I think the Kotla moved from the traditional setting and into the social media setting. So then there, everybody had a chance to speak. And I think one of the reasons why BDP lost is that people took their voices and talked with each other across generations, across education levels, and they began to realize they were all saying the same thing in a way that they would have not done been the case in the past. I think almost everybody in this country belongs to some WhatsApp group, whether it's family groups or church groups or choir groups. So there are all these groupings that are away from the normal media platforms of the past, where people can speak to each other, and people can realize that they're saying the same language. So I think that's one of the reasons why people just coalesced around this idea that change must happen. The other reason also is the live streaming of Parliament. During COVID, we got to see Parliament sitting not in person, as we know all over the world it was the case, but virtually. And because we're sitting virtually, then it was live streamed. Then after COVID, government could not put that genie back into the bottle. So they had to continue live streaming Parliament, and people did not like what they saw. They did not like what they saw in Parliament, what they heard that the representatives speaking. So that again gave the people the courage to realize that I'm not too convinced that this person is speaking for me. I'm not too convinced that this government is speaking for me. And particularly because, and I'll come back to this a little bit later, that there was an arrogance that was just obvious, that was displayed by the Botswana Democratic Party parliamentarians, especially ministers, in a way that people didn't even, they did not realize before, but it was right there in front of them. And the other thing that I think is very important as well is that while the Botswana television used to be the predominant medium through which people got their news, it stopped being that for two reasons. I mean, first of all, just, people are feeling that this is just the mouthpiece of the government, but not just that. The government actually changed the way in which you access the BTV. There's a new gadget that came in. Very difficult to get in only special stores. It was a Japanese system. And suddenly people realized I can still get news without watching television. or Botswana television. So then people got almost disanchored or de-linked from this traditional method, this government mouthpiece, and they found they can get news from other sources, and then they got used to that, and therefore they no longer even watch Botswana television. I'm surprised the number of people say, I don't watch BTV. So BTV, which was a mouthpiece of government, as David said earlier on, also became distant from the people because of access and also because of its content. And the other thing is, is that because of social media, because you see your leaders right there every day, you can tell when they're lying to you, and it became just almost, if it was not tragic, it would be comical, the number of times that President Masisi would tell an untruth. I mean, just would say one thing, this is blue, the following day, I never said it was blue. This is this, I never said. So really, this became just, people just could not believe it. So his character was in total display on a daily basis, and particularly so during the campaigns. So again, people were begin to talk among themselves, away from, they were able to talk among themselves, like I say, through especially Facebook. And the other thing is, of course, what is the brutality, the cruelty, I would say, that the certain, or the government really, I would say, were pursuing anybody who was perceived to be an enemy. I was one such victim, for example, since I would say 2020, almost relentlessly, on a daily basis, continuously, the attack by Facebook accounts that were clearly linked to the government. In fact, clearly, I would say sponsored, by government, were attacking people. And people are not stupid. At first they will believe it, but after a while they're thinking, what's going on here? So again, this distance people from the BDP, because that is not our culture. This is not how we do things. So we saw that. And one, I think, I say another reason why BDP lost, I would say, in addition to the many issues that David has spoken about, is just the arrogance, of the DIS, the Directorate of Intelligence Services. I mean, going outside their mandate, this Hollywood style of arrest. First the chief of police, or the commissioner of police, and then a minister here, a member of parliament here. It was just unbelievable. But all this is because you cannot hide this from people, because it's out there. You don't control the media anymore. People could see this, and people said, this is not the Botswana that we want. So all these things, I think, coalesced to dent the BDP. And okay, let me also say, what was different between the 2019 Parliament and Cabinet to maybe the 2014 Cabinet and Parliament was that it brought in many, many new people. When I joined Parliament and then Cabinet in 2014, the new people were in the minority. So there was sufficient number of people who could pass on traditions, rules, the culture of doing things. So people, so you found people who already had run the government before, so they were able to could learn from other people. 2019 was not like that at all. You find people who had never, ever, ever run anything in their entire life, suddenly running a ministry, and therefore believing that they had power they didn't have at all. So I think the lesson even for the current government is that it is important to induct new members of parliament. It's important to induct new cabinet ministers. It is important for people to know what their powers, where their powers end. Because after a while, I mean, we saw suddenly, I would say, cabinet ministers more or less budgeting outside the budget lines because they just thought they had the power. And then we saw I think you want to say something. I cannot hear you. But you could see this, the shrinking of the power of the public service and the fear within the public service to tell the cabinet minister, to tell government that we cannot do that. So I think, when I was when I was doing my campaign, I did house to house. I went to some of the most, poorest of homesteads, and everybody, was saying the same thing. I cannot, why do they lie so much? why do they do things this way? You know, why do you have to bring a chair to school? My child has to bring a chair to school. It's never happened before. So it was a combination of the actual decline in services and also the seeming or the obvious arrogance of the leadership. And, you know, it didn't seem like they were suffering in the same way. People will say, you know, if your father and your mother, you know, are suffering like you, we understand, but it seems like some people are not suffering at all. You know, some people are not suffering at all, but I don't have a meal. I don't expect to have a meal today. So you saw this, I think there's you could see this disconnect also in lifestyles between the people who are in government and the people who are out there with no jobs. One of the things that David spoke about, and it's so true, is that we have a very, very, very small private sector, so that everybody trades with the government. If you want to buy a bag of beans, you go to a government facility. If you want to sell a cow, you go to BMC. If you want to fly, you go to Air Botswana. If you want to, you know, to run in a train, you know, if you can ever even ride a train, because that has been dead for so long, it's a government. So there is, everybody trades with the government. What does that creates a fear among people, you know, to and therefore a self I don't know, diminishing as a self, yeah, you know, so not to be involved in politics, but I think a dam was broken in a way, so that you saw people now openly saying, this cannot continue to be like this. So I think primarily is, yes, declining services, poverty that was totally at a level that, you know, we didn't know before, and most importantly, the obvious erosion of the rule of law, the collapse of the rule of law, the almost all powerful manner in which ministers were behaving, you know, and so I think that's, you know, why primarily BDP lost. I never, you know, I personally, you know, I felt it, I knew it by January of this year, February of this year. I was telling people the BDP is going to lose, because I was talking to people, and I was saying, look, if you look, and I'm sure Mayor Ronalyn and I can talk about this because she is more the, you know, the numbers person in this game. You know, before, BDP has always almost had like half, you know, of the, you know, the votes. So there's always been 50% BDP, sometimes 48%, but the other half was always opposition, a fractured opposition, but opposition nonetheless. And I think what I was suspecting was going to happen was that this half of BDP is going to half itself again, and half of them are going to migrate to the opposition. And I had no, you know, doubt about that. I did not see an outright win of this magnitude by UDC. You know, I saw maybe a hung parliament, but I certainly saw from talking to people that BDP was going to lose. You know, so, and I wasn't surprised at all that they lost. You know, I think I was surprised that they lost to that extent, perhaps. But I always said they would never get more than 10 seats. I remember some of my colleagues from across the aisle after I left BDP, was BCP, telling them, you're not coming back. But they didn't. I said, I don't understand who you are talking to. You are not coming back. Botswana are not voting you back again. You know, they are done with you, you know, and exactly that's what happened. Thank you.
Unity, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation and illustrations. So you too were surprised at the extent of the loss of the BDP, or conversely, at the extent to which the opposition triumphed. You were surprised.
I would say I said repeatedly that they will not get more than 10. I mean, then they got 5. You know, so you know, I remember sitting across in Parliament, and I'm saying this seriously, across from my counterparts, and marking who's not coming back. And I was getting 22 people are not coming back, because I've talked, you know, to people in those constituencies. These people are not coming back. So I'm surprised at the 5, but still 7. I expected maybe 7, 8, but I expected them to lose. I'm not surprised at the BPF, you know, numbers. I mean, because that is a very strong area of Ian Khama. I always said, they will retain that 3 and maybe get 2 more, and that's what they did. But I'm sure Onalina will talk a little bit about that. If you look at now the actual percentage of popular vote, still, I think 38% of the popular vote went to UDC, the ruling party now. But the other 62 was split among the opposition. So you can see that, and also, then I think if I edit that, I think 72% rejected the BDP. 70%, that's a major kick. So, I think, yeah,
it's a massive,
I would say, yeah.
You were in BDP before?
Yes, I was.
You came in on the BDP ticket in 2014?
I came on the BDP ticket as a special elected member of parliament, which means that I wasn't elected by the people, I was elected by parliament, okay? We have the system where, yeah, I think people know about that system. So that's how I came in 2014 under Kama, and then returned in 2019 under Masisi. But before the year was out, we had elections in October. By August of the following year, I had already quit his cabinet. So I did not believe. Yes, I did not believe that he was.
You left in protest, did you?
Yeah, I did not believe that he was taking the country where it should go. So I quit cabinet, but I stayed in the party. And then, of course, I was abused and trolled and all kinds of manner of things. And I finally left the party in 2023, May of 2023, and then later joined the BCP. So that's correct.
Okay, BCP, the former BCP.
Yes.
That's the old man from Francistown. What is his name again? Who used to be BCP?
No, BCP is Salishando. BCP is a party now has got 15.
The old man from my time. What is his name?
Molapisi. No, Molapisi is BPP.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, one of the problems we've had in our region or across Africa, as I said earlier on, it is almost given that ruling parties lose elections, and in the wake of that, you get the former opposition becoming a ruling party, and the quality of people, I think you made it into it, the quality of people who come in as ruling party cabinet ministers, for example. You made the point that 2019 was a disaster. You had people who had no idea of how to be a cabinet minister. Don't you see the same problem arising now under UDC?
Okay. I see. I mean, obviously, because it is a new party, there's not going to be anybody with experience to run, a government. But I don't think that they necessarily have to fail because of that. I think they must recognize that as a problem to address it. And I think if you have a strong public service, if we have really strong, permanent secretaries, people who run this government for a long time, who know, how to run a government. If you rely on them, if you don't threaten them or frighten them into being cowards and not, offering you advice, then you are going to be okay. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. It cannot be easy.
Well, my
of somebody running anything, so I have no doubt about that. But I think if they recognize the problems of 2019, they can begin to address them, and maybe, because obviously the public out there, the voter, votes for Mr. X, Miss Y. They don't care about the qualifications. They don't care. I mean, so that's not why they ran. They didn't run because they're great at running, a Minister of Agriculture. No. So, but then I think the system must make sure that they, capacitate that particular cabinet minister through other means, even through special advisors. I think, especially if it's your first term. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to begin to speak.
You made the point during your presentation about the erosion of the public service in Botswana.
Yes.
Yeah. And I just thought that Botswana had a very good record in public service. I worked with the public service in Botswana. We brought. I led a consultancy in which I brought the elements from the Botswana public service to train people in Namibia, for example. And so, is there a hope, therefore, that the public service will be raised to the previous status it is to enjoy, as the
I think it is.
as a body that can continue, ensure continuity of good delivery of service, ethical conduct, and confidence, and the confidence of the people? Is it possible that this new government will do that?
I hope, for me, I mean, this government must succeed, because their success is my success. So I'm optimistic. I'm in opposition, but optimistic, and I want them to succeed, because I want my aunt in Muchudi to be able to have a decent meal, and in 6 months' time, which is not happening now. So do I think there is a pool of public servants out there who can do this? I believe so. I think the trick is giving them the mandate, and also giving them the freedom, and not frightening them into thinking that, offering the kind of advice that you want as opposed to advice that you need. I mean, the past, the other thing is that what happened about, I think maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, under Kama, is the public servants were, senior public servants were now placed on 5-year contracts. Okay, and I really think that that should not be the case. Now under Masisi was even shortened in many instances to 3-year contracts. If on a 3-year contract, you cannot buy a car. You cannot, you're always nervous.
You also undermine the confidence of the.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, because you're always nervous. You don't know what's going to happen next. So the first thing I think that.
Unity, you have good precedents. I mean, I'm familiar with Botswana, as you know. I mean, you had the unusual situation where you had people from public service, people like Festus Mogai, graduating to eventually become president in Botswana.
That's correct.
And we always gave Botswana as a good example of the close relationship between public service and politics. And Mogai did wonders for Botswana. Anyway,
that's correct.
My question to you, maybe last question. You made reference to the intelligence, DIS. The DIS was very controversial from the time I was in Botswana in the late 70s, and particularly during Kama's time. And there are many stories about the DIS. And now we're hearing through social media that the DIS boss is about to expose Masisi for various irregularities and even criminal issues. Is that true, or is that social media junk?
I cannot say whether he's about to do that at all. I mean, do I believe that, Masisi needs to be investigated? Yes. And I really hope that the current government will do it in a very open, transparent, and rule of law, based way. That they should, they have a lot of work to do. But on the other hand, they need to look in the past and say, what needs to be investigated. And I really hope they can do that by appointing commissions of inquiry that is just really distant from them, independent. They can find out if there's any truth to anything. They can, make recommendations as to what to do next, and not really get into like a personal battle between the current president with the past president. I really think it's important for us to go back to our old ways of doing things, where you can trust the courts. I don't know if you know, but in the last 5 years, I mean, if you read about the Botswana courts, and for me, I was a judge for 11.5 years. So, and I know that many, many judges who do great work, who have integrity, and it must pain them to see a few or even allegations of, where the truth or not, about a compromised judiciary. So I really hope that one of the things that we can do is go back to the culture of how we used to do things. And also, again.
But when there's similar allegations against Kama when he left office?
There is no comparison at all about,
but there are similar allegations, yes or no, and what was the outcome?
Yes. I mean, yes. I mean, the allegation. Let's talk about the allegations that then really mired us into, years of, hearing Kama Masisi every single day for the last 5 years. It was the allegations around the 100 billion pula theft. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that is just, we never had 100 billion pula for anybody to steal in 2008. Okay. And it couldn't have been stolen in the manner that they would say was stolen. So it was, that was one of the reasons why I actually quit, cabinet, because if public servants can come together and fabricate a case of that magnitude, come up with a really nicely drafted, affidavits listing, when it's all just a pile of lies, that's scary. That is really, really scary, because it doesn't take one person, it doesn't take two people, it takes a whole system to come up with that kind of fabrication, and that's scary. So,
what about the Louis Mchindo issue? What has been the outcome of that?
I cannot comment too much about that, because I don't know too much about the details. All I can say that, as you are aware, I mean,
I raised it advisedly, because it was also linked to the Kama era. At least by allegations.
That he, the allegations of theft by Nchindo, who then
no, just not his theft, but his demise, rather, and the possible reasons why he was murdered.
I don't know that he was murdered, sir. The official line, is that he topped himself, that he killed himself. I have not seen anything to suggest otherwise, and I'm not going to go into this platform and suggest that. I don't know that he was murdered.
No, will I argue with you on that matter?
I don't know that he was murdered.
No.
I know he died, or I don't know if he died. I know it said he died. And that you understand.
I knew Louis. I knew Louis very well.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Unity. I'll come back to you, and thanks for the conversation. Okay. I really enjoyed this. I'll move now to my former student there, Onelina. I hope I haven't held you up too long.
You have, Ibu. I was bored here, wondering when I'm coming on. We should have had a conversation, not just.
I want to start the conversation with you.
No. We could have interacted instead of,
I'm going to start now. If I may.
No. Let me. My colleagues have, my compatriots
have. Carry on. Okay.
Have said, they have highlighted some of the issues, but I want to come in from a slightly different position, because people are looking at Botswana and saying, whoa, what a wonderful, wonderful country. Look at them, change of guard so easy. The outgoing president concedes, and hey, we love Botswana. I, as a Botswana, am absolutely excited, because the last 58 years have meant that young Botswana, had basically lost confidence in the capacity of the electoral system to effect a change of government, particularly in the context that Sibudu Budu talked earlier about how in the first 30 years, probably up to 40 years of Botswana's independence, the BDP government was always very concerned to ensure that the benefits, the creation of wealth through diamonds would permeate as much as possible to as many people as possible, to the domiciles of different ethnic groups, to kill the possibility of ethnic configurations that would then enter into politics. So that worked well. But I want to highlight something. Despite all the things that the BDP government did, which were essentially ensuring that people did not starve to death, because Botswana is an arid country. Our capacity to produce food under the the harsh physical environment is a big challenge, given the size of the country and the small population spread all over the place. It has always been a challenge. But you see, the earlier days, there was always hope that if the benefits didn't reach me in my constituency, in my small little village, something was bound to eventually arrive, because there were certain things that were actually being offered, access to education increasing all the time, access to hospitals increasing all the time, access to jobs, particularly in the public service, increasing. So you're looking at people being given hope. But there has never been a time since the advent of the diamond industry when, in fact, everybody got just access, equitable access to Botswana's resources. But because there was always an understanding that we're a poor nation, as the income increased, the national income increased, there'll be more to share with more and more people. There was that hope. And in fact, the BDP, if you look at the National Development Plan, which were the contract between the government and the people of Botswana, you find that up to the 1990s, the BDP delivered on what it promised its people in the National Development Plan. The National Development Planning process was based on a very clear understanding that we were a very poor nation. Remember, we started as among the poorest in the world, and that we had to be very, very careful with how we utilized our resources, always expecting that there will be some drought of some sort, drought monetarily, drought physically. And so you're looking at a government that gained a good reputation for prudence in looking after its resources and also in looking after its people. So there was that general, and building a professional public service. The problems begin in the 1990s, the late 1990s, when government had run out of easy options of utilizing national resources for high impact. When you build a road where there was none, big impact, it's visible, everybody can see. We only had 6 kilometers of tarmac road. In 1966, when we gained independence, now there's a whole road network of roads across the country. Schools mushrooming in all villages, all small villages, dams. So there was, in terms of physical infrastructure, which also created jobs. You could see this was a developmental nation. You could see there was hope in the future, that we had people in government who we had entrusted with the resources of the nation, who were looking after them very well and to our satisfaction. Until now, we are confronted with the issue that we cannot continue to depend on diamonds alone. We have to diversify so that government stops giving the poor and the unemployed and the aged handouts and start to encourage economic growth that is led by the people, so that government steps back and just collects rent. But in a monoculture like ours, where we are dependent on diamonds, which were and still are to a certain extent protected artificially from regular market activities. When the BS controlled 80% of the diamond, the global diamond industry, it controlled also the prices by stockpiling and then taking out just enough to satisfy growing demand, but at the same time, boom, with spending millions of dollars in making the rich all over the world feel that without a diamond, they were not rich enough. You had to have a diamond. So those were the heydays when growth was growing. But the 1990s, how do we diversify? How do we grow other sectors outside the diamond sector? And the people, particularly the elite, said, no, why don't we privatize? There's too much government. Government is everywhere. Too many parastatals, too many companies that are run by government. Why don't we allow parastatals, the private sector, to come in? But typically, government does exactly what it had been doing, giving handouts to people who are supposed to be entrepreneurs, who are supposed to be problem solvers, job creators. And since 1999, and specifically 2000, when government, the first thing they privatized or semi-privatized was the pension funds for public servants. Taking that chunk of money out of the Ministry of Finance and cutting it up into small little packages to be managed by people in the private sector, so that no minister would have control over the resources, the pension funds. For a while, it actually drove certain areas of business, that privatization of pension funds. We saw those pension funds creating industrial complexes, being invested there, being invested in several areas. The housing market, the pension funds were utilized to give a semblance of growth outside the government sector. But at the same time, and it did create a whole new industry. The banking sector grew, a number of private banks came that were now available for people in the private sector to borrow and drive business. The pensions industry grew to such an extent that by the beginning of this century, really, when you look at the government budget, it's almost exactly the same as the amount of money that sits in the financial institution, in the banking sector. It's almost the same amount of money that is in the control of the pensions industry, as well as health insurance. That insurance, health insurance, pensions, it's a whole industry that's almost the size of the government. But despite that, that hasn't really driven great employment creation. What you've seen is jobs that used to be controlled by the government, by the ministries under the various parastatals, now being managed outside without the private sector creating any new jobs. But most importantly, we begin to have a serious problem that the very people who are managing the affairs of the state are the ones who jump out and receive patronage from themselves as tenderpreneurs. So government tenders, despite the shrinking amount of money that is under the control of ministries, you see these parastatals, the ruling party, literally putting its own people there. But up until the administration of Ian Khama's Retsakama, there were certain checks and balances that made it difficult for people to just steal with impunity from public resources. But he removed that by ensuring, giving public servants and politicians the right to do business directly with government, which meant that a minister then sets up a private company and then competes with other citizens for the tenders. And so we have had corruption, basically unbridled since the administration of Ian Kama. But Masisi just killed whatever was still left of the conscience that was in the public servants. Unlike my colleague Unity Dow, who believes in the innocence of the DIS, I have absolutely no doubt of the level of corruption that is not only in the DIS, but in every area of the public sector. Our ministers, when they have to sign off tenders, they demand that they be paid. I'm not going to name any names, but young people will tell you that when they win tenders that the minister has to sign off, that minister will demand anything up to 25 million before he can put his pen on that. That is the kind of Botswana that has come to pass in the last 16 years in particular, but worse under President Masisi, because the Kama family focused their personal access to public resources through the army. The administration under Masisi is everywhere. There isn't any area of tenderpreneurship where they are not involved. The ministers, if there is an innocent minister today, well, except the new ones who are coming in, but up to the 30th of October, if there are innocent ministers, they are a rarity. If there are innocent civil servants, senior civil servants in particular, but the level of corruption goes right down to even the principal of a primary school, because they have to do the tendering for food supplies in the schools. And so it has become a cancer. Corruption has become a cancer. Now, with that background from a failed privatization strategy that basically just created hundreds and hundreds of opportunities for patronage, you then have a demographic structure where up until the 1980s, early 90s, almost 50% of Botswana's population was under the age of 15. And then the survival rate of the diamond industry has meant that you have fewer deaths of babies, and then the older people live longer. And so the younger generation, those are the diamond kids who grew and multiplied so much that when we now started having problems with population, and there was advice that no, please you can have sex, but don't make babies too much. You then see that there is a bulge that by the 2011 population census, it is now decreasing. That population of young people is now decreasing until we hit the under 15s hit around 30% of the population. So it means the group before them are now growing into upper teenagehood, upper 20s and 40s. And so we have this bell shape that is moving towards old age. And we have begun to see that this demographic dividend is the one that has had access that Sibudubudu talked about. But jobs, no jobs. University degree, no job. Form 5, no job. And they are seeing other young people who are in the ruling party who have never run businesses in their entire life, or the parents have never run businesses, getting multi-million pula tenders because they carry a BDP card. wondering, or when is that tender? If you look at the people who've just been removed, all of them are shocked how they could possibly have lost the elections, since Botswana gave them 53%, was it 53%, 57% of the popular vote, no, 53% of the popular vote when Masisi came in 6 years, after 5 years ago. He had come in a year before the elections. And then suddenly it's like, poof, the president, the former president of Botswana, Masisi, is clueless about how he could possibly have lost elections. His vice president is wondering, how could it happen that they could lose? They were so sure that they were winning. But here's the thing. When you look at the voter trends, I look at the actual popular votes to read the undercurrents. And I had actually been certain that in these elections, the BDP would get something around 40%. And that is why on the 28th of October, is it November? The elections, 2 days before the elections, I said it would be impossible for the BDP to square the circle. They will lose, because that's the general trend. The things that they think they can buy votes with, they fail abysmally at lifting people's quality of life. Our education system has collapsed. Our children are barely literate when they leave university. They are certificated but unemployable. Our health system has collapsed. We have potholes all over for an upper middle income economy. Our infrastructure is beginning to look as poor as poor people who've never been rich. And then you see people flaunting their wealth, publicly flaunting their wealth. The BDP, for the first time, I think, directly stealing from public coffers to buy vehicles so that they can run around and show that they actually are in control of the money. These things will need to be investigated, of course, but these trends have always shown. But here's the thing. Because of this monoculture, we depend on diamonds. Everybody wants to have control of the diamond resources. When you look at our politicians, they change all the time, because for many of them, it's if you get into government and you get a cabinet position or you get a council position, you are literally guaranteed that you will be raking in tenders as the person who has won elections. And so the contestation gets heated up, because government, as I say, we now have a three-legged economy where there is 1/3 of the money is located in the banks, another third is located under the control of the insurance and pensions industry, and that too is subdivided. And so the contestation, the BDP elite lost complete access to their own people. They have lived in a bubble. Even now, when they share debates on why they lost, they are pointing fingers at one another and saying, but I built a company, I haven't been getting enough tenders. You undermined me. So it's all about tenders. They have lost touch with their voters. The very things that I think it's Schleimer, I can't remember, because I was given the job and then it was taken from me because the BDP didn't think, I'd be able to tell them the truth, or that I don't know. They have forgotten that they were warned once to stay in touch with the electorate. But they think that they can buy the electorate by giving them food hampers. If you look at the quality, I'll show you some of the things that BDP members distributed among nice blankets, like this, great quality blankets. You go to our hospitals, there isn't enough food, there isn't enough bedding, there isn't enough of anything. You go to our schools, our kids starve. They study in schools that have broken doors, broken windows. The public sector is in disarray. But the ruling party has members that are now millionaires. And they assume that Botswana will continue to just put them back in. Let me bring out another element. You know, up until recently, the opposition would have taken over power. If you look at the 2014 elections, the UDC and the BDP and the BCP actually won 51% of the popular vote, which did not, because they were separate, they did not win the seats, despite the sheer volume of people that voted for them. If you look at the trends, it was expected that 2014 would actually mean that the BDP would rule with lower than 50% of the popular vote. But thanks to the split votes between the children of the former BNF, that the BDP has sometimes won more votes than it deserved because of split votes. But then comes Ian Khama, who splits for the first time. You have the BDP itself splitting. And therefore, but you now have splits in the BDP, you now have splits in the opposition. But generally, the BDP is losing its popularity. But if you look at the whole history, the trajectory, you'll see that every time a new president comes in, Botswana give that president the benefit of the doubt. They give him honeymoon votes. Let's see whether this one will perform. It happened with Mogae. It happened with Masire before him. It happened with Khama. When Khama came in, he was supposed to actually have functioned under with less than 50% of the popular vote, but it was increased, and then of course he lost even more. When Masisi came in, he was also given a kiss of a nice little package, popular vote. The 2019 elections are very interesting in this sense, that Khama's role in there, particularly the bromance that he had with the UDC, meant that this party, which should really have won the 2019 elections, didn't, because the Khama came in with put in a new vice president who was going to correct the mistakes of Khama and put an end to corruption. But because there was this bromance with the UDC lost the elections. They want to believe that somehow the ruling party was cheating, but in fact, they handed over the votes to Masisi, because people ran away from where Khama had headed. So 2019, Khama played a very negative role in the affairs of the opposition, which is currently the ruling party. 2024, honeymoon over, but the ruling party, the BDP, still believes Botswana, given despite the demographics that show that you now have that bulge of young people who needed jobs, couldn't get them, who needed opportunities, couldn't get them, who couldn't all have access to tenderpreneurs because they couldn't all be allowed. A number of young people registered to become members of the BDP because that was the only way that could give you a fighting chance of getting a tender. But the majority didn't. And so they decided that when UDC comes, offering them salvation, they think maybe this one will deliver. And we have a problem. We have a serious problem because everything about giving people, the BDP has mastered and failed to buy votes through that. But it is the same BDP which under Masisi, where corruption is so endemic, where untruthfulness is now endemic, that young people are willing to listen to other voices. But it is not because young people flooded into UDC they wouldn't have made a big impact. The big impact comes from BDP members who were fed up with Masisi's dictatorial and greedy, personal greed, acquisitiveness of the very worst kind. BDP members voted for UDC. That's how they lost in most of the areas where the BDP used to have totally safe seats. Those seats were lost, not because people thought that the UDC would actually give them better. Their party had promised exciting things before, and since 2000 has been failing to deliver. But they needed to get rid of a tyrant, and they shifted their votes towards UDC. And this is the first time in the history of Botswana that a ruling party gets to govern on the basis of 37% of the popular vote, which has sent shivers among, people are already crying, oh, first past the post is unfair. Unfair to who? Unfair to who? Because there has to be a balance between who wins, because we have seats. If you tie votes to 61 seats, you can't have half a person occupying that seat. Only one person can win that seat, whether by one vote or 1,000 votes. And so the UDC won with the support of BDP members who were fed up with how insular Masisi and her corrupt cabinet had become. And so they shifted their votes. And for the first time, we have such a major drop. Normally, it's about 3% drop, disenchantment from the ruling party. But this time, to drop from 53% of the popular vote by the BDP to a lousy 30%, that's 23% drop in the popular vote of the BDP. And that went also with the seats.
So in brief,
because voted
Honorina,
against RAP.
in in brief, there was much more anger and frustration than expectations for a better tomorrow. So at this stage, you are saying basically
the young
people are
people
frustrated and angry.
They are frustrated and they're angry.
The protest vote.
They are frustrated and they're angry.
So do you think UDC needs to be afraid? Huh? For the vote,
UDC needs to be afraid. This is the honeymoon period of UDC, but they are starting on very small change. At 37% popular vote, any mistake could be politically fatal to it. The issue is, can they create jobs? Where will they get the money? Because it has already been squandered by the outgoing administration. And then the diamonds are now, they have dropped in terms of income. There is no comeback, major comeback in terms of the diamond. I don't think we'll actually go back to the era when the DBS controlled 80% of the global diamond industry. They are now hanging at around 30-odd%, and they are not going to be investing in putting more money for advertising. And our people, we have stockpiles. This company that Masisi wants to have 50% can't sell their diamonds. They don't know how, because selling means advertising. Where is the money to actually advertise? Zero. So we have a problem. Yes, sir.
You have said it all. You're very passionate presentation, but very underpinned by a very, very strong political economy approach, which I'm familiar with, having worked with you. You have really given us a very solid, comprehensive political economy of Botswana. And my questions were just two to you. One was the first, which I put on the table already, that the UDC need to be afraid, need to be very, very perceptive, introspective, because the vote is less for them than a vote against BDP. And it is a conjuncture that most opposition movements in Africa miss. In 2008, I said to Morgan Tsvangirai that Mugabe lost by a landslide. He said, "You mean I won by a landslide?" I said, "No, there's a difference. Votes in Africa and elsewhere, votes are always against, mostly against, and have nothing to do with incoming. So if I were the UDC, I'd be very afraid. And I think what you have said in outlining the political economy of Botswana is so profound, and I'm glad it's well recorded. As you know, we are on YouTube. We have already 122 on this platform. I assume most of them Tswanas. And I don't know how many on YouTube directly. But it's a very good reflection, the numbers of the interest in this discussion. And I think we've done very well. I just have to ask one question to, and I just said to, we have here, without me appearing to be patronizing, we have here among the best of Botswana's talent, What is the government in Botswana doing about engaging and placing such talent in the interest of the nation? What is it? What's going on? What's wrong with our governments in the region? You simply marginalize the best of our people. Have you ever been approached by any of these governments to give advice in one sector or the other? No?
I have done a lot of consultancies for the government of Botswana, because these are meant to help with policy development. But you see the arrogance of power. They are given advice, they put it on the shelves. And then a few years down the road, they get consultants to do exactly the same thing, put it on the shelves. There is no political will, in fact, to utilize the resources that are there. On the positive side, despite UDC's low popular support, they have enough seats, and of course they've increased that with the thing. I always prefer that when a government comes in, it has to have a comfortable enough seats to be able to execute its mandate. But we now have literally since the last 16, maybe even we can stretch it to 20 years, we've had a creeping cancer where young people occupy positions, particularly under the last two administrations, before they are ready. You see, my group, Ibu, we were the first group of young Botswana to go to university in very large numbers. If you look at the group that went to university in the early 70s, we were the largest group to have gone to secondary school in such large numbers. And then the kids behind us came also, the numbers increased. But we had a professional public service where you graduated and you have elders who would handhold you so that you learn the job. The principles and the guidelines set out there that when you are in service, you are not there to accumulate wealth. And a number of those people who taught us left the public service poor because they didn't steal. Now, a lot of us have gone out, we have served at international, at regional level on the African continent, but people are terrified of asking for help, particularly since in the last 16 years, it has been about, are you in our party or not? And then with the Masisi, Ian Kama, it's, are you with Kama or with Masisi? Has been fighting fights all over. And that is why he lost. He fought his own people. He forced, like Don Quixote of, the mythology, fighting imaginary battles and assuming he's won them. So there isn't great use of the critical mass. This country has spent so much money educating its people. My generation has retired, but people are terrified that somehow we want their jobs. We've served the nation. All we can do is to ensure that the generation behind us benefits from our knowledge, but also give us insights of how a youthful world, a youthful perspective, because it's the combination of old knowledge and new knowledge. You know, the young people, they are so good with information technology, which terrifies most of us. The combination will work beautifully. And that is what UDC can count on, how to put together the critical mass of educated, skills, and knowledgeable Botswana to assist with the younger people sharing and exchanging knowledge. Whether they will do that is a challenge.
Your last words in terms of the way forward. Your last words, 2 minutes.
We have great hope. The UDC is poised between a very difficult, on a very knife edge. The public coffers have been stolen. There's a possibility that they can actually retrieve some of the stolen goods. the money, the animals, etc. Whether that will be enough, we don't know. But they also have opportunities. We have opportunity to build this country again, to ensure that we provide access to young people with talent, to other people to work together. We have to go on a nation building project again.
Thanks,
a unified nation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is most passionate. I've never seen you in such a mood, but yet very, very coherent. Thank you very much. Unity, the way forward. Can we make Botswana great again? Unity. Unity.
Across this country, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I was saying, yes, it is possible to rebuild. I think one of the things that I often say is that this country retires experts too early. They spend a lot of money training people, and then you retire at 60. If you look around the world, countries are utilizing expertise of the people for much longer than we do. And I think that's a problem, that we retire people so early. So I often say that this country is littered with brains that are not being used. Professors who are no longer teaching, permanent secretaries who are no longer running government. It's really, the list goes on. And I think this government can find the support of those people to assist them in rebuilding this country, because we can all agree that the voter does not always return or present to the public expertise in the kind of expertise that you need. They may be expert in something else, but you want something else, So I'm not saying that the newly elected members of parliament are not experts, but of course often there's a mismatch as well. So I think they should look into those drawers for those brains across this country and say, how can we use them? The other thing is, of course, and I say it because I saw it in the last parliament and cabinet, is that young people who join government need to be fully inducted. I mean, there's no substitute for experience, but the least you can do is actually prepare them, to do their job. And often we go into parliament, we go into government without sufficient preparation. To be voted into power is not sufficient preparation for you to do your job. And also, lastly, is that, can we return to the rule of law? Can we return to certainty, to consistency, to civility? Can we return to trusting institutions again? Can we return to institutions keeping in their own lanes? Can we reform the DIS? And I don't think, maybe when Elena did not hear me, I never said the DIS was not corrupt. I think they were at the head of corruption. I mean, corruption is not just stealing also. Corruption is actually abusing your powers, to arrest people, to harass people, to harangue people. So I have no good word for the DIS. And again, sometimes when I say this, I feel sorry for the people who work there, because there are professionals there who go there to do good work, but the leadership, the culture there, of course, corrupts the whole system. And unfortunately, the public servant, because these are public servants, who suffers and who gets tainted. But I'm talking about the leadership of the institution, not necessarily the individuals who work there and do good work. Thank you.
Thanks, Unity. So nice to see you again. Let's keep in touch. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Unity. David, you're the last, but not the least.
Oh, we've lost David.
David is gone.
Yes.
Fine. I think this has been fantastic. One of the highest attendance we ever had. We always thought Botswana, being a small country, will have a small attendance. Well, we had 130 on this platform this evening, and we don't know how many yet on YouTube directly and Facebook. So it's fantastic. So I have to thank David, Unity, and Onelina for fantastic work. There's nothing more to say. I think the presentations were so coherent and powerful. We want to wish Botswana, on behalf of all of us, well for the new government. But I think one message came out across. The need for Botswana, which has a serious demographic problem. In fact, the demographic trap. The need to break from the post-colonial African tradition of always avoiding its own talent, its own skills. And as I said earlier on, I was not really patronizing, because I know the three speakers tonight. These are among the best minds, not only in Botswana but in the region. Let our governments, what's his name, the new President Moko, use your people. You have fantastic skills. Let's believe in our own people. Let's get our own people to help us. And on that note, I'll just say good night and say that our next policy dialogue on the 28th, we'll be looking at the Trumpism, what it means for America itself, and there was the democracy, the global order, the security, the Palestinian question, Ukraine, and the rest. I hope you'll be joining us again, and good night. Thank you very much. Without even reading